man in the gym, Bob Taylor, and I'm on my mission to try to help youth basketball. And today I'm in an office with one of the nicest guys I've ever met in my life, a lifelong friend. I want to introduce Dean Lockwood. Dean has been a coach in the guys and the girls side of the basketball, a little bit like me. Dean's coached at, and I'm going to let Dean introduce himself by telling you every place he's been. But Dean and I go back to a camp that we've talked about earlier called Wolverine Fundamental Basketball Camp. And we kind of grew up with the camp route. So Dean, just tell us a little bit about where you've been, who you've worked for in your long, illustrious career.
Well, thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here. We met at Wolverine Camp the summer of 1979, which I was coming off just my freshman year of college basketball at Spring Arbor College. And you were at Arkansas Tech at the time, I believe, and had work camp for a couple of summers. But I joined that camp staff, and just wonderful, wonderful memories. Well, we obviously worked for a great teacher and a mentor of ours is Coach Bill Allenbrook. But after graduating from college, I was very fortunate. It was through Wolverine Camp, really, that I made a connection. We both knew Coach Dick Parfit. And I was a GA for Central Michigan men's basketball that first year out of college. Very fortunate to do that. And really back then the GA wasn't a true GA spot as they are now. I think I got a little extra off of summer camp and ate training table meals with the team, and that was about it. But from Central Michigan, I went to West Point for 3 years. I was an assistant for the men's basketball team at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. So 3 years with Army basketball was followed by 5 years on the men's staff at the University of Tennessee. I worked for Coach Don DeVoe for 3 years, Coach Wade Houston for 2 years during that time. After those 5 years, I went to Northwood University, still on the men's side. I became the head coach there for 6 years. Northwood was transitioning from an NAIA school into NCAA Division II. So it was a fun 6 years to be part of that transition to help that program kind of get up and running. From there, after 6 years, went to Central Michigan for 1 year, back to Central as a full-time assistant this time around. Worked with Jay Smith and Mark Montgomery, who's right across the hall here at Michigan State. So worked with those guys for a year, and then went from there to Saginaw Valley State University as the men's head coach for 6 years. That was followed by 15 years with the Tennessee Lady Vols. Coach Summit was kind enough to reach out during my time at Tennessee. We had made a connection and a friendship, so she reached out after the Saginaw Valley 6 years. I spent 8 years with her, 7 years with Holly Warlick as a head coach. And after that 15 years, came back to Michigan where Coach Susie Merchant reached out to me. I was the associate head coach for 4 years there, and I'm now entering season 1 as the director of player development under Coach Robin Freilich.
Well, good luck to everything. Maybe give a quick history of like how many WNBA players or NBA players you've had the opportunity. So I want the audience to know how successful and how you've dealt with players that are successful. You see what they've done, and we'll talk about that as well.
Well, thank you. No, I believe, and I want to get this right because it's been a few years since the men's on the men's side, but I believe there were 5 players during my time on the men's side that were drafted, 6 who actually either were drafted or made NBA rosters, because one player was not drafted but made a roster as a free agent. So I believe 6 on the men's side, and then there have been a total of 30, Bob, on the women's side who have been WNBA draft choices, made rosters, or been invited to, well, actually 30 that have been drafted into the WNBA. Not all of those have made rosters, but most have. And then as a position coach, I had 13. During my 15 years at Tennessee, there were 13 players that were drafted into the WNBA. All of but one made rosters.
Wow. Wow. So this will go into a little insight. What you'll have is what a successful player needs. And I'm basically on a quest to try to improve basketball. And I want to do it at the youth level. I want to get more players playing, and we want to make better players. So I'm a big person on thinking that, okay, what are successful people? What do they do? Let's copy them. The other person, when we met at Wolverine camps that we kind of intersected with, and I've talked a lot about, is Coach Meyer. We've talked a lot about how I kind of learned from him, Don's son Jerry was a two-time Mr. Basketball in the state of Tennessee, so I kind of said, Don, what'd you do with your kid? And he kind of gave me some insight, and we've kind of copied that. And I've written my book, The Old Man in the Gym. I talk about Coach Meyer a lot.
Certainly.
And had some big influences. So the big influences to me were Wolverine camps, Coach Meyer,
Yep.
a lot of different things, and then coaching. But the bigger thing to me, I'd say that I had 45 years working summer camps. I mean, off and on, working them. I think I was a freshman in college. After my freshman year,
Certainly.
I started at Wolverine.
If you count those college years, yeah, you
And
probably
then when
40
I was
plus.
directing at Oakland, and then basically 30 years of being a college basketball coach. And then I say 25 years kind of makes my century in that working with my own kids. And I thought between, 8 or 9 with every one of them, it comes to 25. So and those were, in my mind, the most important years. I think I learned more about basketball and seeing it through my kids' eyes. And then I kind of said, well, there's not too many animals like me that had coached college for 30 years, and then all of a sudden he's got a 4th grade daughter and needs a team to coach.
Right.
So I kind of went from summer camps to college coaching to summer camps back to youth coaching with my kids. So I've kind of been up and down.
Yep.
So what do you think are the things you'd like to see fixed in the players coming up through the youth program?
Boy, very loaded question. I think there's a number of things. I think you and I have talked about this in quite a few conversations, but I think there's so many games being played. And I think for me, I would like to see more work done on their games versus just playing games. I think players play an inordinately high amount of games, spring, summer, just going from one season to the next and playing games. And don't get me wrong, I think games are certainly important, and you develop things from a competitive standpoint, from an understanding of the game standpoint, from a confidence standpoint. Some of those things you can only get from playing games. But I would certainly like to see that ratio changed a little bit between practice and games. I remember one time, you and I have talked about this one time, there was a little clip of Coach Oriema at Connecticut that said one of the ways that Europe gained ground on us so quickly is their model of playing 1 or 2 games a week and practicing 4 or 5 days a week versus the model that we have in America here, where they're playing in the summer. A lot of times they're playing through the month of July or even through parts of June. They're playing so much that they're not getting the practice and the individual work, the skill work, things of that nature. So I think, I would like to see that ratio changed.
Okay. And one thing that I've written about, or my friend Bob Wiley from Minnesota says, my quest to help youth basketball is that one of the reasons when I coached my daughter's team, I basically was out of coaching. I had a 5th grade daughter that needed a team. And right away I saw an emphasis on winning at grade level versus player development. And I thought, after working camps all those years and coaching, that's kind of a backwards thing. So when I coached my daughter's youth team, I talked to the parents, well, why can't we have family practice? So why can't I take my kid to our court at our house and play with mom and dad and make it a family practice at a young age?
Certainly.
And I thought that really helped us in that ratio of practice to games.
Yep.
Yeah, so basically, as I'm going through and being the old man in the gym on the road, conversations with Bob Taylor, I'm telling youth parents and youth coaches that they don't have to be a formal practice for these kids to get better.
Right.
Right
Certainly.
now it's like 2 days a week practice, 3 games on the weekend, every other, and there's nothing wrong with going to the backyard and shooting with mom and dad. And I thought that really gave what I call my kids and the team that I coached a head start.
I would agree with that.
We gave them a head start in that we were playing and we kind of understood that. And so to the youth coach, what advice would you give to a youth coach that might have a player that someday wants to play at Michigan State?
Sure. Well, I would tell you, you had a very telling statement just a minute ago. It's not about winning the 5th grade championship. Don't get me wrong. sometimes people hear that and they immediately go to, oh, so winning's not important. We're not saying that. But is it the most important thing at that level? I would say most definitively no. Because what you're thinking of, you've got to think big picture. You've got to think long term. And if that's the be all, do all, end all, to hang a 5th grade plaque on your wall or a trophy, and you're going to show that at Thanksgiving and Christmas for the next 40 years, I would say you're probably missing the boat on what the game can give you. I think to your point, to your question of what would you tell someone, what would I tell someone in terms of, say they're starting in 4th, 5th grade and have that goal and aspiration. It's about learning the game. It's about developing an IQ for the game. It's about developing a feel. We've talked so much about this, about concepts, learning concepts. And then again, something you mentioned, I think that's so important at that. We did a lot of this at Wolverine with those younger groups. Players need to have fun at that level. They need to enjoy the game and love the game, which will keep them coming back. If they're playing for somebody that, if you're running a 4th or 5th grade practice like you're running a college practice in terms of, we're going to get on the line and we're going to run for this, we're going to do for, I think that's going to be a very different feel for young players who are just getting introduced to the game, and we want those players to get hooked. You want to hook them at that age. You want to get them to love it, and once they start loving it, obviously they're going to come back for more. So I think teaching them concepts and basic fundamentals, teaching them footwork, things, how to play with their feet, how to play as a team, be a great teammate, and then to love the game, I would say that is a great starting point. If I were coaching a 4th or 5th grade team, or talking to a parent who was coaching a team that said, okay, yes, my son or daughter would like to play in college eventually, I think that's number one. Get them to love the game. Teach them some concepts, help them to learn and understand the game, and then let them continue to evolve. And as you mentioned, the free play part is so important for them to develop that feel and those instincts. You talked about the structure today. Let's say they're playing 4 games a week, as you said a minute ago, and practicing a couple times. Well, in addition to that, those free times, some of these kids now, they're with the trainer, and they've got a trainer, and they're doing things that the trainer tells them to do for 2 days a week. So where do the natural feel and the instincts come from? So I would tell you, going to that's so important to develop and to create that and nurture that in young kids.
And, I'm older than most. I was 42 when my first kid was born. Mm-hmm. So I was an older parent. And I started coaching their team, and I would tell my wife, this isn't going to work. Like in 5th grade, we go home. I said, this can't work. There's no way this can work. Mm. And one of the things I think has changed in our generation, like our parents both sent us to Wolverine camp. Mm-hmm. And my mom and dad probably scraped up some money to send us up there because I was in the driveway for 2 or 3 hours, or going down to Rogers Park in Sparta.
I could see how much you loved it.
I loved it, so they wanted to reward me, but I was playing all the time. Well, some of these kids, their first experience in basketball is going to a camp. Mm-hmm. Or their first experience in basketball is joining a youth team. Mm-hmm. Well, they're going to teach them basketball. And I said often, we had kids, I was watching kids get introduced to basketball, learning out of bounds plays, and they had never played a game of one-on-one in their life.
Right.
So I really felt that was a backwards way to do it.
Yep.
So in my book, The Old Man in the Gym, I talk about the ladder and the natural way to kind of progress. And then when I had 3 kids, I felt I kept getting a little better at it every time. At first, when my oldest daughter, Ellie, was in 5th grade, I wanted to win. I wanted to win that game. And so all of a sudden you come up, but then I would tell my wife, this can't work. We're going to begin with the end in mind. And she would, how competitive she is, and she'd get home and she'd start yelling at me, they press you, why don't you press them back? And I don't get in zone, and then she'd get Ellie all mad at me, and I'm like, well, I want them to make the high school team. Because I know if they make the high school team, they're less likely to get in trouble. They're less likely to get sideways. There's so many things. And then
learn great values, too.
Great values. Yeah. And with girls, I read a study where 90% of women executives in Fortune 500 magazines and Fortune 500 companies played sports as teenagers. So it's so important to get that start with what I call the end in mind. And some of these kids, I told my kids, I never had a uniform, I think, till 7th grade. I don't think I ever paid a dime to play a sport.
Right.
You know, our little Pee Wee baseball team was sponsored by the JCs or the Reliance Club or the Rotary or the Ace Hardware or whatever. And these kids are paying $800-900 to get introduced to the game.
Yep.
And then I think the parents, you know, a lot of times I struggle with parents at first, and they think the best team is a winning team. And not to go, but there's a team in town that would beat us in 4th, 5th, 6th grade by 25, 30 points. And that's the team my wife was mad about, that they were beating us and they were pressing, and they won with what I called tactics. If we inbounded the ball, they would double team us. And then we taught them, you know, upside line, middle, reverse, cross court opposite. But our little kids couldn't throw cross court opposite. So they brought all 5 people over, they double teamed us, and they took what we called the tee or circle the ball away. So we couldn't get the ball over half court, and we would get beat. And then what I'm on the mission to try to convince parents and youth coaches that we began with the end in mind. We wanted them to learn to play. That we won the 8th grade state championship. Everybody on our team played varsity basketball as a freshman, and everyone played in college except one person that played Miss Golf. She was Miss Golf, and she went on a golf scholarship.
Yep.
So basically, I said I flipped the ladder, where the team that was whooping us, they had tactics. They brought them all 5 over. That was a tactic, and it was hard to deal with in 5th and 6th grade. But then once we understood the concepts and were able to throw the ball over the press,
different deal.
Then in 8th grade, we beat them by 25 points. And in 8th grade, you know, we won the state championship, and they had very few players really go on and even have a decent high school career.
Yeah.
So winning at grade level has to be put behind player development.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. Yep.
So the basic style is like, okay, how are your players? Like, you feel like at the college level, do you see a drop in the IQ of the players and the instincts of the players?
I think some players, and again, it's very hard to make a sweeping generalization because you get so many different players. But I would say overall, in watching basketball, and again, I was 22 years in the men's game, 20 in the entering season 20 in the women's game. So let's just look at my most recent history, 19 years of recruiting in women's basketball. I would say that there's the athleticism and some of the things that they can do are every bit as good as they've ever been. Certainly the IQ piece, the feel, I think there's been a little drop-off in that. Having an understanding of the game, how to play, making decisions, making the right decisions at the right time. We could go into a whole litany of things. Just recognizing when someone's open, when someone's not open, when to dribble, when to not dribble, what constitutes a good shot, a winning shot, what's a winning play. Defensively, we could go into probably a couple dozen scenarios. I would say that yes, there's a feel and an instinctual part of the game that has dropped off a little bit. Even watching in the men's game a little bit, again, not to make a generalization, because there's some players out there that have incredible feel and just are doing tremendous things in their court savvy and awareness. But overall, the instincts for the game and kind of the thing too, we could back up just for a moment, talking about playing basketball on your own, playing pickup games or things where you just learn to feel the game. You know, one of the things I always remember, Bob, going over to Great Britain, I went over there for about 8 consecutive years. I was a consultant to the Welsh Basketball Association and helped a guy in England start the first overnight camp in the north of England. So I was over there for about 8 years. I was always struck. We'd be driving around towns and you'd see kids out in the fields or in the street playing soccer. There was no one coaching them. They were kicking a ball around, and those kids had a feel. Like a couple times during breaks, there was a coach in particular, one of the Welsh guys, and he had a couple young sons, and I went to a field, and I was chasing that. And I was not a soccer player, I knew nothing about, at that time I was pretty fit, and I could run, and these kids just had to feel how to space and keep the ball away, and then they would get me to commit, and then they'd kick the ball to an They didn't, to my knowledge, they weren't coached. That certainly in that moment they weren't coached. They had a feel for that. That's what I think is one of the things that's missing from today's youth game.
And that's a driving force of the old man in the gym. I really felt by watching our kids play, they weren't really playing with an instinct or feel. And go back to your point earlier, it's hard to really fall in love with that. You know, when I saw my kids starting to play, I saw the coaches with clipboards and whistles, you know, and they're diagramming things. And I'm like thinking
Very
back.
structured, almost robotic.
Yeah, and I said, well, I'm going to get my kids away from the clipboards and the whistles. You know, I want them to go out and play with some kind of spontaneity.
Yep.
I remember in 1980, I was assistant at Lake Superior, 82 to 85 or 6, or you'd probably remember better than me. And we'd be down there, and I'd go to a gym called St. Cecilia. And I said, I couldn't take a football and throw it as far as I could throw it and not hit 25 college players.
Yep.
And there were old guys kind of watching the games and sitting at the water fountain between games. They would give tips to the guys.
Sure.
Here, try this or try that.
Yeah.
And I reason that's how young people should learn how to play. They shouldn't be learned how to play by coaches with a clipboard and whistle and a diagram and directing everything they do. Or to your point about the trainers, I call it do what the person in front of you does. I really felt that we were dulling the instincts. So when I started my ladder and turned it upside down, the first thing I wanted to develop was an IQ, an understanding. And the first 3 steps of the ladder are really kind of interwound. Okay, so if you vision a ladder going up with steps, it was IQ and then concepts. You know, we kind of taught them, well, the defense helps, and here's what you do, and here's how you can go by your defender if you push dribble versus, and then instincts on how to put them together. On the side of the ladder was fundamentals. Fundamentals were all the way there.
Sure.
I mean, it's up and down the ladder.
Yeah.
That's holding the steps together.
Yeah, you can. That's the foundation to every
And
good player.
we
so.
wanted them to learn how to shoot. We wanted them to learn how to pass and dribble. And then on the other side of the ladder is what we called competitions. And at first I called it hard work or drill, you know. And then I started thinking, well, if I'm a 5th grader, I don't want to go to the gym with Dad and do drills. I want to compete. So everything that we tried to do by teaching this was inside of play. Like we always tried to play. So we kind of came up with competitions versus drills. So we'd play to a score.
Yeah.
We would play a competition that we talk about a lot on our YouTube channels. Is these competitions will teach you the feel, the instincts, and the IQ. And I think kids need to play, because I would drive back Ellie from some of the practices, because I'm her dad and she's in the back seat, like, how'd you like practice today? I could tell she was having more fun when we were playing in the family court. You know what I mean? She was, yeah, let's go home and let's play. You know, I want to go play with Maisie or RJ or Mom or Dad or whatever. They were, and have some friends over. So she liked basketball right away. I think oldest, she wanted to please Dad, but I could tell by her ring of voice the organization wasn't that fun. So I said often that we've kind of over-organized the organized sport. So then I became the outlier of 5th and 6th grade coach. Everything we did was basically look like a playground. We were playing 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3. One of the things that I'm going to say till my end of time in basketball with young kids, over dribbling stunts growth. So we did a lot of dribble limits, no dribble, 1 dribble. We have violations when we scrimmage, and if they just drop dribble, you know, that's a violation. So we wanted to make the kind of player that you would want, or a high school coach would want. So I say there's a real path, there's a fork in the road to, do I want to win at grade level, or do I want to develop players to play for a high school coach?
Right.
There's 20 million youth players in the country, and like 550,000 play high school basketball. That's on the men's side.
Right.
On the women's side, there's even more.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have anything into there. The stuff you notice at camps, anything else you would tell the youth coach or the youth parent?
Well, I think, again, what you say is very interesting, because I think the playing part and the competing part is very important, because number one, that it helps instill that love for the game. As you mentioned with your daughter Ella, her enjoyment of practice. Now there's also a balance point. It's it's like a lot of things. Sometimes you hear people say, they use the term, well, so and so is a player's coach, and they think, well, they just let them do what they want. Or they may say, this coach is too disciplined, they're too rigid, they don't allow players to play. There's kind of like, it's like almost two mutually exclusive worlds, right? I think there's a sweet spot in between what you're talking about. Certainly there needs to be, for somebody listening to this right now, they might just say, well, is Coach Taylor just advocating go to practice and roll the balls out? No, I don't think that's what you're advocating at all. I think there's teaching and there's concepts within that competitive element that you're talking about, so that they are learning lessons. They're not over-structured. Sometimes you can get so robotic. Our friend Coach Meyer used to say more games are lost by overcoaching than undercoaching. And you can get so rigid and so structured that everything is, you're almost, it's kind of like learning. If you just are giving players mimeograph sheets or copied sheets or putting stuff on the board and then having them regurgitate it back to you, they're really not self-discovering. And they're probably not self-discovering what their passion is or what they might be good at. They might find an area that, hey, I'm really good at this, or man, I really want to zero in on anatomy and physiology. That's the part of science I love. Well, enabling students to self-discover is important. So to your point of setting up structured competitive slices of practice, elements of practice that also teach. And again, there are points when they're first starting out, I think they should learn the game and have fun. But as they progress, there are certain things that aren't going to be fun. Let's just be frank about it. There are certain things about any sport that you have to do repetitions, and you have to have a high tolerance for drills, for monotony, things of that nature, to learn anything and be good at it. But there's no reason why those two worlds can't merge, and you can, again, I call it the sweet spot, finding a merging of those two worlds whereby they're learning, and they're learning discipline. There's nothing that is going to teach something more than repetition. Repetition is the mother of learning to me. That's the mother of learning. So in order to get reps and to learn well, you have to be prepared to learn. You have to have the discipline to do what that task requires. But then also incorporating elements of free play where they can go out and experiment. That, one of the things I remember as a kid, I would watch games, and we've talked about this before. You were lucky to get a game of college on a Saturday afternoon. The old TVS, game of the week, the Big Ten game of the week, and then the NBA games, many of which were tape delayed. But I remember watching Archie Clark do a crossover dribble, the great Archie Clark for the Baltimore Bullets, and I would go out and emulate that. So again, there was study and there was some discipline. I'd go and practice it on my own. I'd practice across, but then when I would want to now test that by getting out into a pickup game and saying, okay, how's my crossover? Is it going to work on this guy? Or what do I need to do to make it better? So I think, again, the sweet spot, Bob, is to find a merging of those two worlds where there is some structure, there is repetition, there's some discipline, but also there's an element and a component of free play, allowing players to use their instincts and feel.
And a lot of what I'm emphasizing is what I'm calling that early development. Like, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. I always call the 3rd through 6th grade the sweet spot. Mm-hmm. When I had 3 kids at the Midland Montessori School, they gave me a great deal on rate. And I said, well, how can I help you? And they said, well, you can be on our board of directors. So I was on their board of directors, and I remember carrying Ellie in the first day of school before I was a board of director. Yep. And Miss Debbie was half my size. And she looked at me and she said, why would you ever carry somebody through a door when they can walk through it themselves? And her eyes and I was like, oh. And
good point.
And it was like, okay, this is where you want to teach them the accountability and to grow up. But when I was working with my daughter's 4th, 5th, 6th, even 7th, 8th grade teams, I wanted them to be able to have something the high school coaches wanted. Mm-hmm. And I might argue with a lot of people that what was going on other teams was so much structure. And I thought it was a dead end in the road, if you would. I wanted my kids to basically have that feel. And the other thing I found, Dean, I coached for 30 years. I couldn't coach a fifth grader 5-on-5 for anything. I couldn't do it. I just like,
Yeah.
you know, you didn't help the helper, and they look at you in those eyes, and I didn't do what?
Yeah.
Well, and then again, to compare when my daughter might be on another team, the coach was so concerned with a play buster, or they wanted to run the stuff they ran in high school,
Right.
the stuff they were comfortable with. And I thought, that's just kind of, there's just something missing with this.
Sure.
You know, that should be at the end of the ladder, tactics or team
Right.
improvement. But I want somebody to say, okay, they get it, they understand it. When our kids went to 9th grade practice, the coach at Dow High, Bob Wellman at the time, said, we're having your kids demonstrate shell drill. You know, we're having them demonstrate, because we had given them to where they could kind of think for themselves.
Right.
And I would tell a lot of youth coaches or youth parents, especially youth parents, well, I don't know anything about basketball. And I said, well, you know more than they know. I mean, and just going out and playing, and just playing one-on-one or rebounding for your kid, or
Right.
or helping, you can keep it simple.
Yep.
And that little bit of head start, because basketball is a funnel sport. Like every year, there's less kids that make it,
Yep.
And what I found through the Montessori, to go back to that, is when a young kid feels good about something and they like doing it, they wanted to do it more.
Certainly.
And what I found with other kids is they felt they're behind. They wanted to go somewhere where maybe they could feel special.
Sure.
They wanted to get away from it. So I think it was that good early start that I keep on this quest to try to get people to buy into or do more, is to get them to love it first. To your point back there, play. And I just remember coming in, we had the driveway across the street. We were playing 1-on-1 and 2-on-2 way before we're learning out of bounds play.
Absolutely.
And way before, you know, they were trapping us and taking the tee away.
Absolutely.
And I just thought, being an older person, being the old man in the gym, this seemed out of order to me. And my daughter, my other daughter, and my son, they were able to play varsity as a freshman and play in college. Both of my daughter's teams, the whole rosters played in college, except one that went to be Miss Golf. And I really believe it was an early start. They just kind of got into it a little bit more. Then the parents got involved, and they started having kids over, and a lot of their life was just kind of basketball.
Yeah, I can see that. Makes sense.
So that's kind of what I'm trying to do. Is like, why should a kid have to pay $800 to be on a travel team to learn basketball?
Right.
It just seems so out of order. And then I believe, to your point, yes, they're on the team, but a parent can supplement the practice of the coach. They can supplement by playing them one-on-one, or rebounding, or renting a court at a community center. They can supplement that and get them further ahead. And it's not, I always say, it's not a Phi Beta Kappa thing. You know, it's just a little bit of time in.
Yep.
So that was kind of my thing. And like you and I were talking the other day on the phone, and you were saying the park, I forget the name of it, in Bay City.
St.
Stan's Park. And you went down there and you would play, and you realized my game's not to dunk on anybody. So when I played with Dean, he had a great pull-up jump shot, and he was a great player at Spring Arbor. Boy, he would go up and shoot it, but I think that kind of came from what I call the law of the playground. You kind of figured out where you're at, and I think a lot of that's getting lost with kids today, in my opinion. That's why, and you're dealing with the cream of the crop, you know, in the Big Ten, but I'm saying overall, I watch my kids play at a Division II school. I watch them all play in high school. I think the level is going down as far as what I call IQ concepts. And
Well, and to that point, Bob, real quick, I think what's happening is the players that we're seeing coming through now through the recruiting process, or what you're watching when Ellie and Maisie are playing Division II at all levels. But again, they start at the youth, right, and they go through, you know, youth programs, they go through high school and AAU programs, whatever, and obviously the ones that make it to college. You're seeing their products of maybe they've gone through years of every time they've hit a court, there's been a practice plan, and they've rigidly followed that plan. Or almost, again, I call it the robotic kind of, hey, we're going to start here, going to go here, right down to how drills are rotated. One of the things, anybody that's ever watched me do workouts, they'll say sometimes, how do you rotate? Figure it out. You do that on your own. I'm not. That's something I love to help players self-discover. As a teacher, that's one of the things, and I think students are so much further ahead. Something that you talked about, you did with your kids and your youth team. When you help them self-discover, I think they're so much further ahead in the long run. In that moment, there still may be some fog. Like you found with your 4th and 5th grade, there was some fog. They didn't know how to break a press or didn't have the strength to throw a half-court pass. But when they started to self-discover, and as they grew and matured, that the world just opened up for them. And I think, to your point now, I think what we're seeing is a lot of players who've come through that system of rigid, adhere to a practice, everything is done for them, told what to do. And again, don't get me wrong, when you're running a practice or workout, that's fine. But there needs to be a dietary supplement to that. It's like somebody who's not getting enough omega-3 in their diet. You've got to have a supplement, and that supplement is that feel, free play, competitive element where you learn more. You first of all self-discover. To your point about me, I learned very quickly. I wasn't going to finish over bigger guys. I wasn't dunking, so I learned in order to stay in those games and be effective in those games, here's what I had to do. And I think players, when they play on their own and they go to an open gym or they play in a pickup or they play in some type of competitive thing that's not as structured, I think they learn that.
That's a big part of what I believe in. And to the youth parent and the youth coach out there, we meant by competitions, like we would play 3-on-3 inside where they would kind of get the ball in offense.
Yep.
So now they're competing, and then we might put the ball in the middle of the back of the defender who has to face the basket, and then they go, and then everybody has to make a rotation to try to figure out what's going on. Mm-hmm. So we always wanted to build their understanding of the game with the IQ, the concepts, the instincts. Okay, that defense helped, so I passed where it help came from. Or even as I said earlier, by 6th grade, we understood help the helper. So if they help the helper, well, that person over there is open.
Yeah.
And we're playing there to understand the game so they could instinctively go out there. And then when they had their skills, and the next step of the ladder is individualism, they knew basically who they were and what their game was.
Right.
I say so much of youth basketball and youth sports is we're judging fish's ability to climb a tree. Mm-hmm. Like they don't have that, they don't understand it, they don't know what they're doing. Well, you knew me, I was slower than molasses in January. I could only have to do things a certain way. My son has rabbit feet, so he can get through there. So to teach or have somebody, I'll go back to when Ellie and Maisie got pretty good, the trainers in the area would say, hey, we'll work out with them. We just want to put them on the webpage. We won't charge you. So I went, and the trainer said, what do you think? And I said, well, Ellie and Maisie are two different players, and I think you're trying to make them the same player. Mm-hmm. Maisie's more explosive than Ellie. Ellie's maybe a little more creative. And I think we get into a lot of what I call cloning or the over-organization of organized sport. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I feel as a youth coach is develop the love, develop the feel, develop the understanding to where they want to go play.
Right.
And then they're a player.
Right.
Let me ask you this question. You have a 6th grade son, 6th grade daughter. Do you think they have a better chance of getting ahead by playing on a higher level travel team or playing against sophomores in high school or playing against older kids?
Yes.
Which one?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
What do you think is a better developer for a young player? To play with older kids on the city park or to play against a higher level travel team?
You're talking the setting now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, now what grade is this?
Sixth grade.
Okay, 6th grade, I would definitely say the park. I would definitely say. Now, as they progress, I would then incorporate that other element in there. But initially, while they're learning it, while they're in their infancy, so to speak, in the game, they're not in their infancy as a young person, but in their infancy and learning the game, definitely the park.
And I'm saying that they're still doing the travel. You
Sure.
know what I mean? But if you get them a chance to go play with older kids or go back to,
So valuable.
my thing is, it worked for generations. Now we got organized. Why do we forget about?
Right.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
And that's my argument. Just because we went one way doesn't mean that we should forget about what worked.
That's right.
And
No,
that-
I totally agree.
and-
there's certainly value in that in time. You know, you hear about it all the time that the sixth grader that got moved up to the eighth grade team and they're playing games. I'm not negating that there is value in that, but if you said to me, let's make it even more narrow, the question. You got one weekend, and this weekend is going to be big for your kids' development. Could they go to the park and play against older guys or women, or would they be playing on a high-level weekend tournament game? I'm going to go with that park for a sixth grader because I think, once again, they're going to learn some of the things. They're going to learn how to handle themselves, how to interact. They're probably going to get roughed up a little bit, and they're going to have to deal with that. And there won't be officials to call every foul, and they're going to have to. So there's some hidden lessons in those environments that you're maybe not going to. Everything being so structured sometimes is not necessarily a good thing for a young player.
And basically, in the old man in the gym, it's kind of like a spirit, I say. It's more of a method. But if your kids are good enough to play sixth grade on an eighth grade travel team, I think great. But don't forget about playing with the high school kids on the weekend.
That's
too.
right. That's right.
Don't forget about, again, we don't have to go totally away from that.
Yep.
And what I hear a lot of parents, I mean, maybe, Coach, I like what you're saying, but where do we go do that? We don't see any pickup games going on anywhere. We don't know what to do, you know?
Yep.
And that's where I've said in the community, if parents could organize that.
Right.
A lot of times, the high school coaches aren't staying in the programs for as long as they used to.
Yep.
So I think as a youth parent, one of the things I'm telling youth parents is organize it. The high school kids want to help.
Yes.
They want to go out and play.
Yeah.
And if you can organize that, I just think we've gotten so far one way that we've lost part of the other way.
Yep. You'd like to see them organize the opportunities, not the actual practice themselves. So you could say, let me organize on a Monday night, Wednesday night, and a Saturday morning. We're going to have open gym, and we're going to have all of our kids here, and now the middle school kids are welcome, as opposed to, okay, now everybody's here. Now we're going to do this, and we're going to run the fast break, and we're going to run our out of bounds plays. We're going to run our offense. So let's just structure the opportunities for them to get together, and then they can grow from there. Well, one of the things I remember was so helpful to me. This was when I was in high school, and we had come off my high school team. Had previously, I wasn't on those teams. It was when I was still in eighth grade and ninth grade. They won back-to-back state championships. Well, a couple of those guys were playing in college. And they came home from college and they were working, I think they were working second shift, if I'm not mistaken. Well, we would get up early in the morning to go work out in a gym. Playing against those guys, we'd play cutthroat one-on-one for about an hour and a half before those guys had to shower and go to work. That was one of the best things that helped my growth and development. There was no one else in the gym but the three of us. There were no officials, no structure per se, but we play, and just being in that environment and learning how to play against more physical guys that were a little better than me at that time, let me tell you, it's invaluable.
Yeah, see, that's my sermon from yelling it on top of buildings is that it worked, so let's not lose it. You and I have talked about the difference between being a farm animal or a wild animal. And I think often the structure, and again, I think we're talking the same thing. Kids want to be on a team. They
Sure.
want a uniform. They
Absolutely.
want to play. I get it.
Understandable.
But if you want to get your kid the head start to the parent,
Right.
it shouldn't just be 2 90-minute practices a week and 3
Right.
games on the weekend.
Right.
And I really believe that the structure isn't good for the kids. I think what we did as a youth coach was we were teaching them to learn our offense by playing 3-on-3.
Yep.
And I could teach them 3-on-3.
Yep.
And there's just real simple rules to it that they naturally got better. Plus they got competitive because we always did a down and back or push-ups. So the other side of the ladder to hold it up was to be competitive. So we could try to get our players to kind of figure it out. So remember the other day on the phone we're talking about a farm animal versus a wild animal. And I believe the system is creating a lot of farm animals.
Yep. I wouldn't argue that.
This is our play. That's the 2 play, or that's the
Right.
state play, or that's the city play, or that's the whatever. And I think the following of directions, I think, is stunning a lot of kids growing.
No question. Well, again, I go back to as a teacher, one of the things I just believe in so firmly as a teacher, I teach a lot using the Socratic method, which means you ask questions. Like when I do a film session with the player, I'll have some selected clips prepared, but I don't sit there and go through a litany of them and say, okay, see this play, you need to go here. See this, you need. You know what I like to do, Bob, is I like to say, what do you see? Bob, what do you see here? Okay, now why did I pull that clip? Tell me what you see. When you help someone self-discover and they can learn some things on their own in that capacity, I think the learning sinks in so much deeper into the soil. I think you're not, when I'm just regurgitating, or I just give it to them something that I'm doing, and if I label it and show it to them, say, okay, next, I'm just watering the topsoil. But man, when I ask them questions and they start to, and then they're really, after a while, usually after a few sessions, they're in there and they're telling me, oh, I know why you got this one. That water is going deep into the roots now. It's sinking deep into the roots where I think the real learning takes place. So yes, to your point of that, I just think it's so important that students or athletes learn by being able to have some freedom to learn their game, learn who they are, learn what works, and to self-discover versus just being fed all the time constantly. Being fed all the time constantly does not again, you see this all the, you know me, I'm having goofy analogies, but somebody that raises a wild animal, and if they're just feeding it all the time and then they want to set it loose into the wild, that animal hasn't learned to hunt. They haven't learned to hunt. So teaching kids how to hunt for themselves, very important.
Yeah, I think, yes. And that's one thing we tell youth parents now all the time is everybody has their camera. If they're just playing, just film it. If they're playing, you're playing outside, you're shooting, and we started doing that later with our kids, and they like to watch it. It's just another way to learn.
Sure.
That wasn't there when
No, that's right.
our parents couldn't do
you had
that.
to have a Polaroid.
Yeah, they had to have. But they can just simply do it and then basically say, hey, what did you see with that?
Right.
And get them to think, which again develops the IQ.
No question.
I'm a big person that believes at the end of the day, for the youth coach, is an IQ.
Mm-hmm.
An IQ, well, again, I'm repeating it, but understanding a concept, okay, what to expect from the offense, and that helps my instincts.
Yeah.
Okay, my instincts are better now. I know what kind of skills I can use, and it just created a whole spiral. If maybe even at our level, what we're talking about is we're trying to get it to sink in at that level.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe their level is just trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
When I was at the Midland Community Center, we would we had group trainings or whatever, and the parents on the sideline were like, "Oh wow!" And I'm like, "Well, wait a minute. I still can't set a VCR. I tried for a decade to set a VCR. I couldn't do it. Why do you think they're going to get it in 4th or 5th grade the first couple trips down the court? Where did mistakes get out of learning? And I think that's something that I think the parent who is the paying customer, and what we talk to parents a lot about is don't just be a Uber driver. Don't be the ATM machine. Like when Ellie was at the tennis center in Midland, I would watch the tennis lessons. Well, you know me, I like tennis. And I'd go and watch the tennis, so I kind of jotted down, I knew how to do it. And so in between sessions, I would just go do the tennis, the same thing the professor or the instructor was doing. We had her at a very high level of the tennis center, simply by just repetition.
Yep.
Doing a little bit more. Some
Watching
people,
and then repeating. Yeah.
and it was just that was their tennis for the week. And I think that's where a lot of coaches that I talk to, high school and college, yeah, they play 2 days, that's their basketball. where basketball to us, that
Everyday
was,
thing.
it was like every day, and it
Yep.
was nonstop.
Yep.
And I just don't see how a kid can get better doing, if they're just generically paying for that team and being on the team and doing what they're, I don't know how they can get ahead unless they were just have special gifts,
Right.
special things.
Well, yeah, and you, Bob, did you look at anybody that's good at anything? Somebody that's good at playing a musical instrument, somebody that's good at writing, somebody that's good. We can go right through. Somebody who's good at cooking. It's not something they just do. Okay, I'm going to cook 3 meals a day. They experiment with cooking. Oh, let me try a little dash of this and a dash of that. Oh, no, that didn't work. Oh, let me do this. Somebody, the music, how many great songs were ever written because guys were doing a rip and they came upon the series of chords. They're like, hey, wait a minute, you're onto something here, or science. You can go to any field, experimentation and just doing it because you love it and you're spending time with it contributes to your overall growth. So that's what we're talking about here. Yeah, if you're just doing it, if I love cooking and I only cook 3 days, I'm just going to cook 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and another time I'm not messing with it or thinking about it or experiment, I'm probably going to only go so far. But if I'm there and always thinking about how do I improve it, how can I get better? Man, that was a great dinner. What if I added this to the salad, or what if I did this? Those are the things that where real growth happens.
Yes, and I think that to me, the youth that feels special. Like, I read a really good book once. I think you and I might have talked about it, called I, Why. And basically to this generation, the title of the book, I, Why, The Last Chance to Save This Generation. And I'm a parent. I'm taking it pretty serious. And they're saying everybody wants to feel special, but there's got to be a substance to it. Like, I would take Ellie out and she'd make or shoot 200 shots and she'd run to her end of the street and back. And I'd say, Ellie, that's special. You're doing something that nobody else is doing. And they're talking about the trouble that the new generation is having in that, well, I'm going to get a 4.0, I'm going to go to Notre Dame, and I'm going to start at $100,000 because I'm special. Everybody's telling me. So the key is to give them some substance to why they're special.
Right.
And I think that, again, everybody gets a uniform, everybody gets a spot on the team, they paid their rate, everybody feels like everything's even. But it's a kid that really feels special to want to sink in to be the cook or wants to sink in to be a better basketball player. I understand it. I want to do more.
Right.
I'm going to experiment with this. I'm going to do things that the other kids don't do.
Yep, for sure. For sure.
We'll wrap it up with one thing. I'd just like you
Yeah.
to comment on my 4, I call them the if factors. I don't know if I've ever talked to you about
I don't know.
the
I'm
if
not familiar.
factors.
Go ahead.
I think it's unnatural. It should be inexpensive and fun.
What should be?
Basketball, I'm talking about youth basketball.
Okay.
Now, should be inexpensive and fun, much like the driveway, the park that we're talking about. When I first living in Midland at the Midland Community Center, I was still coaching, and I'd walk around the track on the top of and everybody's yelling at my kids, and the kids are yelling, and the coaches are yelling, and it costs money, and I just don't think that's a natural environment to learn to do something. And I look back again how I would be, I wouldn't like that. You know what I mean? And the coaches calling timeouts, and at the community center, like if I had a red wristband, you had a red wristband the other day, we guarded each other, and everything was structured, and it was, I just think it's like, Einstein said, make it as simple as possible,
Sure.
but not simpler than it is. Youth basketball is complicated. It's like, again, after 30 years of coaching, I tried to coach my 5th grade, and I'm going to coach it like a college team. And I'm like, oh, this isn't going to work.
Good luck. Yeah.
No, they just can't. And one of the other arguments is soccer doesn't start 11 on 11. Why is basketball start 5 on 5? And then the poor little kids can't make a basket, and they can't catch it. And so we tried to find some things with it, but inexpensive and fun. Then we said instincts and feel. If instincts feel, that should be one of the biggest things the youth coach is centered on. And I really believe the structure of the ladder turned upside down takes a lot of the instincts and feel away. It's making them farm animals versus wild animals. So I wanted to change the if factor too, and I have 4 of them.
Okay.
Then I said, integrate fundamentals. Like, I would watch my kids practice layup lines. Well, you don't shoot a lot of layups and layup lines, you know what I mean, in a game, when they get in competition. They taught passing across the free throw line, thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs up, pass and catch. Well, that's pretty easy, but it's not game-like, you know what I mean? So we said, integrate the fundamentals. We always said bones are greater than cones. And I thought a lot of the kids were learning with a false sense of, well, this is easy. And then they get in the game, little kids all over them. They don't know how to throw around the defense.
It's a
They
little
don't
chaotic.
know, like Coach Ellenbrook's passing lanes. You fake a pass, you make a pass. Well, a coach does them a big favor in teaching them how to do that. So I said integrated fundamentals. Then the fourth one, I said an intentional foundation. So when my kids would come home and have a complaint about a coach, my response, being older, was, well, how good would you be if they couldn't complain about that? Well, I'd be pretty good. Okay, then why don't you solve the problem? You know, Johnny won't pass me the ball, or Susie won't pass me the ball. Well, did you try to work it out with them? And I think by the structure of youth sports, we're losing a lot of that.
Oh, absolutely.
Like at the
Absolutely.
playground, you had to work it out.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you didn't work it out, there's going to be trouble.
Well, and
Or not trouble, but
yeah, no, I know what you're saying. I think the biggest thing, what you're talking about right there, that really resonates with me, because one of the great things that I look back for, I'm going to make this very personal. One of the things that was so helpful to me about playing at the park and in pickup games where there wasn't officials, there weren't coaches, the structure wasn't there. You got a healthy dose of truth. You got a let me tell you, I missed those games where I guarded the red wristband. You got on guys that would kick your butt, and you learned real quick, man, I am not at that level. So if I want to get to that level, I got a whole lot of work to go back and do. You learned how to solve problems. You learned conflict resolutions. Sometimes we'd argue about a foul or a score. Well, you know what? It doesn't have to end in a fist fight or you'd work it out. You deal with it. You know, so how people are picked. You know, a lot of times there would be times where guys would choose guys, right? And boom, boom, boom. You realize if you're one of the last guys picked, you got work to do. It would give you a healthy dose of truth. And you know what? I think sometimes we're trying to shade our young people from that. I think the best thing we can do is expose them to them early. And you'd be surprised how incredibly resilient young people are. I'm not a parent, but I've been around young people for virtually all my professional life and even through college. And I will tell you, young people, if they're allowed to be, are incredibly resilient. So getting your butt kicked, but not in a fight per se, but I'm saying I'm matched up against a guy. I remember a couple times. I remember guarding a couple of guys from Saginaw. I guarded William Bond in a game, who was from Saginaw High, and I guarded him when he was at Southeast Louisiana. He waxed me, and I remember sitting in the locker room after that game and saying, "Man, do I have work to do." If that's a Division II guard right there, I have got a lot of work to do, because he just whacked me. That's healthy for me. That was one of the best things that could happen. So I think going to your it factors, I think those things are really good for young people to experience. And that's part of the built-in mechanism of what the value of playing in non-structured environments will give to our young people.
And yes, thank you. And I also think what a coach can do is they can make their practices more unstructured. Or like, again, I go back to Ellie was like in kindergarten or first grade or something. I'm walking around there, and there's 200 people at this game. I mean, there's all the parents. I mean, some of them are waiting for the next game.
Sure.
But they're there, and you've been to the community center. It's like 4 courts, and all the bleachers are full. And I just said, I just don't know if that's a normal way kids should learn. It should be inexpensive and fun. And then I feel like, okay, mom sent me to Wolverine because I was playing more than any kid in the neighborhood.
Right.
Well, you reward it, but now it's like, I've said it before, but the parents almost become the ATM or the Uber driver.
Right.
They're dropping them off. I remember when I was a youth parent, I don't mind the coaches keeping my kids later for extra work.
Yeah.
But I got to go pick up another kid, and I got to do, you know what I mean? And that just seems a little bit more. But then the practices, what I tried to do in the practices, we played a lot of cutthroat.
Yep.
We played a lot of one-on-one. We played 2-on-2 and 3-on-3. And that, I think, elevated their IQ. It elevated their feeling instincts.
Yep.
But also, it was fun to go to practice.
Absolutely.
And play and do that versus, okay, we got to... I don't know if I ever told you the story, and you might appreciate this from Wolverine. I was contemplating writing the book, and like you knew, I didn't know what was next. I'm out of coaching, and I'm running a JV basketball camp in Petoskey. I'm sitting there, and I'm kind of writing things, am I going to do it or not? And maybe God came in at this time, but the coach from Harbor Springs called two-play. Well, the little girl had the ball on the wing, and she didn't know what the two-play was. So she got the ball and she froze. So she dribbled to the sideline because she didn't see anybody on the other side of the sideline. She thought it was safe there.
Yeah.
Then she picked up her dribble and people came over to guard her, and she didn't know how to pivot. God bless the Lord. She didn't know how to pivot. She's up against that sideline.
Tough spot.
And she had no idea what to do, you know. Well, the other girls on her team just kind of stood there and watched. Nobody came back to help her. You know what I mean?
Kind of a tough moment.
Yeah, they're not going to go back and their friends in a fight. They're going to come back and they're just kind of like waving
a little
around.
bit frozen, yeah.
And then we taught our kids on top of all this would be dribble to the middle of the floor. Always dribble to the middle of the floor. If you get low, you pivot. But if you're on the sideline, you throw it off their leg and you get the ball back. Well, the coach called timeout. And what do you think he thought the problem was?
I'm not sure.
The girl didn't know the two-play.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm a man, as a coach, I'm an older coach. I'm saying the bigger problem is the teammates didn't come back to help.
Yeah, she doesn't know how to pivot.
The girl doesn't know how to pivot. She dribbled the sideline instead of the middle of the floor.
Right.
That's the problem.
Right.
And that kind of inspired me to kind of write the book and just say, I want to help.
Certainly. Yeah, it makes sense.
Last question of the day.
Yep.
Okay. We're going to play a game. I think I've asked you this before. I talk to Dean a lot. Dean is the rock in my life. Dean's one of the good guys. Root for the Spartans. Dean's a good guy. But you and I are going to divide 20 players, and we're at Wolverine. We have the draft. Right-hand layup, left-hand layups, fifth graders. There's 20 of them.
Yep.
You take 10, I get 10. You take first, I take second, third, you get fourth, and we come up. Okay?
A fair draft, yeah.
Now, when they're seniors in 7 years, all right, winner take off for $1 billion. We have the same amount of time that organized sports allows us, that they have, okay? And we take it, so we can't...
10 hours a week.
Whatever the rule, but whatever we agree upon. $1 billion in 7 years. Are you going to teach them in the same method they're learning today if you're going to play me in 7 years for a winner take off for $1 billion?
Well, first of all, I'd have to know how they're learning today. But I will tell you this. What we've been talking about in this session, if it's cookie cutter, all structure, regurgitate plays, no. I want, again, I use that term also, the sweet spot. I want the combination of skills and fundamentals, and of course the intangibles. You want to build competitiveness and team play and all of that. But then I want them to be able to feel the game and have instincts and to know how to play versus, again, this is a phrase that used a lot. You've heard this, Coach Meyer used to use it, Coach Newell, because Coach Newell is a big proponent of motion. One of the great master teachers of our game of all time is Coach Newell. And he said, teaching them how to play versus teaching them a play or to run plays. Big difference. So yes, to answer your question, I would not want them to learn A to B to C. This is how we rotate drills. No, I would not want that.
What would you interject to your team or your families in the team? You're all in it together. You're saying, $1 billion, there's 11 of us, we're going to divide it evenly, we're all going to get about 900,000, whatever.
Yeah.
What would you tell your parents?
I think, again, kind of what, you've touched on some things earlier in this conversation where you can help support them and feed their hunger, feed their passion, feed their fire, their love for the game by spending some time with them, encouraging them, doing so. And again, depending on if we have a parent that was a Division III All-American, they could probably help them more than if somebody went to dental school and all they did was golf all their life or something like that. But certainly they could be supportive of their young person by giving them things that they can do and just sharing that time with them. You're fostering that love for the game so that then when we get them for practice, those kids have their hot button pushed. There's a fire for the game. So that's what I would tell the parents.
And I'm going to tell them to get my book, The Old Man in the Gym. You can get it online. Read what we're doing. So even if you weren't a college player, you could help them.
Yes.
Or you can find people that can help them.
Certainly.
And part of the Old Man in the Gym, I want to bring families together. I can't tell you how much it's enriched my life that all three of my kids wanted to play. And it's time you can never get back.
Yeah.
And my dad was a great man, but he always said, Bob, when you have your kids, God don't count the time against you when you're playing with your kids. So I would try to get them to play more, become things, just rebound for them.
Yeah.
The other day I rebounded for Ellie and Maisie. Not the other day, you know how bad I am with time, but I rebounded for Ellie and Maisie. They're both in high school. I took 12,000 steps. Sweat with your kid. So if we only had the same amount of time, and it's $1 billion, I'm going to tell people, family, activity, get friends. I'm not necessarily going to send them to a trainer, and let's even make the trainer outlawed. We spend the same amount of time.
Sure.
So the families can interject. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Been a
you.
pleasure.
Fine.